Hello, welcome to Movie Marathon Mood. It's the show where we watch movies and talk about them. It's as simple as that. And today, we're talking Lethal Weapon once again. Riggs and Murtaugh team up to take on cop killers in Lethal Weapon 3. And they're still not too old for this shit for one more in Lethal Weapon 4. We're going to talk about that all right here on Movie Marathon Mood.
The only thing they do contribute is mayhem and chaos.
No, I'm chaos and he's mayhem. You have the right to remain unconscious. Anything you say ain't gonna be much.
Hi, I'm Jesse Gilstrap, joined as always by my pal, Drew Cordell. Drew, how are you, my friend?
Doing great, Jesse. How about yourself?
Doing well. Before we specifically dive into Lethal Weapon 3 specifically, before we go into our first movie, something that we could push to the end, but I just want to get it out of the way. We're in a kind of a weird place with Lethal Weapon 3 and 4 that we can't call it the end of the franchise. We can't even call it the end of the film franchise because they're talking about doing a fifth movie. Obviously, there's the TV show that neither of us have seen.
Right.
That I don't know if I'll ever watch it or not.
Yeah.
I might watch it. I'm not sure. I've heard mixed things about it, but I don't know. Unclear on a final prognosis for that show and what I would make of it specifically if I want to check it out. But they're also talking, just recently read stuff about making a Lethal Weapon 5 with the whole crew back together. They talked about doing it, and obviously there's always talk about movies that end up never happening, but who knows?
Right.
We might actually get it. I guess we'll see. But Richard Donner wants to make it his final movie. And, he's 90 years old, almost 91.
Wow.
Who knows when they would actually start production. He hasn't made a movie in 15 years at this point. His last movie was 16 Blocks, which I also have never seen.
Yeah.
Speaking of things I haven't seen, I've never seen 16 Blocks. Yeah, that's quite a long time without making something. And look, I'm not an ageist person. If you're mentally spry and physically up to it and whatever, like, sure, go ahead. By all means, and like while you're still living, it's not like you need to be shoved off into a corner and relegated to doing nothing. You're entitled to create things. So if he wants to make the movie, by all means. But it is an interesting thought that he hasn't made anything in 15 years, and he's almost 91 years old and talking about making a Lethal Weapon movie.
Right.
With Mel Gibson and Danny Glover back, and who knows who else would all be back, considering every movie they grow the family.
Yeah.
And get new people on board and have to keep everybody else. Which is something we'll have to talk about with 3 and 4, the ever-growing cast of these movies. But I don't know. I would definitely be there for a Lethal Weapon 5, but I find it interesting to just think about if they ever do make it. Like, Lethal Weapon 4 was kind of considered far away from the previous movies when it came out.
Right.
Think about now. Think about how much further away we are now. Lethal Weapon 4 came out 6 years after the Lethal Weapon 3. And now it's been, 23 years since Lethal Weapon 4 came out.
Right.
So 23 years. Like, man, I don't know. It just kind of makes it, talking about this beyond just the hypothetical Lethal Weapon 5, just in terms of the weird place that it leaves 3 and 4. as these is not really the end of anything. It's now these interesting further chapters. I guess it's not necessarily a bad thing, but what an interesting series this is. And I also think it's interesting that Richard Donner would like this to kind of be a swan song. That it means enough to him that he would like to go out making a new Lethal Weapon movie. It kind of shows you that the idea of family is real. That they really did have a good time making these movies,
Right.
and it means something to him. You know?
It almost makes me wonder if he kind of wants to go back to some of the darker edge that the first two had, that these the that we're going to talk about don't have as much, uh or if he's wanting to go all in on making like a warm, uh kind of family feeling to be his last film. It'd be really interesting to see which way that they would go if they did make it. I know Mel Gibson is still an amazing actor. Um, his personal problems aside, he brings an intensity still to this day that he brought early on. And Danny Glover is still wonderful, and I could go on and on about how great Joe Pesci still is, and he was just brought out of retirement. Um, and Rene Russo, and I guess we can bring Chris Rock back too. I don't know, uh, but the idea is interesting. I almost would like it to be more back to just Riggs and Murtaugh and kind of be not that those other characters couldn't be in it, uh, but I would almost prefer it to go back to simplicity.
Yeah.
If they did, if they do end up making it, and you know, there's no telling because we've seen so many franchises come back these days. Uh, some that you would expect and some that you would never expect that have had sequels come decades later.
Right. And there's actually a key point there. Robert Mark Kamen, who wrote on the script to this movie, created the Karate Kid,
Right.
which recently came back with Cobra Kai in highly successful fashion with Cobra Kai. Not with him involved, but
With
just the idea of that franchise
right.
coming back and surprising everybody.
Uh,
What a crazy, crazy thing that is.
yeah.
Who knows what could happen? Lethal Weapon could come back. And Cobra Kai is worth pointing out that's not just Karate Kid, but it's the original cast. Coming back, and a lot of the original players coming back into their roles throughout that series. Um, you never know what could return and become fresh and new and still be really good.
Right.
There's reason to think a new Lethal Weapon would be worth watching, but it's also become convoluted, complicated because we talked with the first two movies. They're both A pluses to both of us.
Yeah.
Great, perfect movies. And spoiler alert: neither one of these movies, 3 and 4, are A pluses.
No.
Uh, we'll discuss the nuances in our discussion here, as far as exactly where they land, but neither one of them for sure lives up to the standard of the first two movies. In a weird way, I hope that Elite the Weapon 5 could bring that back
Yeah.
and do something new and exciting and recontextualizes it. But it's interesting that the other thing about bringing that up is that each of these movies complicates the screenplay, the creation of the story itself. They all have complicated histories.
Right.
And I don't mean to keep bringing Die Hard into the equation, but Die Hard with the Vengeance was a Lethal Weapon script at one point.
I actually didn't know that.
And that's another thing that's worth pointing out is that uh, one of the differences, and this doesn't say anything about quality, but one of the differences between the Die Hard series and the Lethal Weapon series is that Lethal Weapon is at least consistent on its character.
Right.
I don't think you could do the opposite and just simply switch a Die Hard movie script into a Lethal Weapon script.
Right.
It would be harder
Yeah.
because those characters are kind of an integral to that. Whereas, who is John McClane? And I mean that in the scope of the entire series. Who is John McClane as a guy? If you look at him over the course of all the movies in that series, who is he?
Right.
He's not exactly consistent.
No.
And it's not like Bruce Willis is a bad actor. He could have portrayed a character that was steadfast in one way or another. Martin Riggs and Roger Murtaugh are the same guys in all these movies. And they grow, but they're still the same guys. I think that's really important. The part of why the series works even when it's not at its best. And speaking of not at its best, let's dive deeper into Lethal Weapon 3, shall we? Specifically. We have Jeffrey Bowen returning to the script, and this is one of the weirdest things is when you look at the credit. It's a very bizarre credit because he wrote a script. They brought in Kamen, as previously mentioned. And Bowen did rewrites on the Kamen script. So the credit actually says screenplay by Jeffrey Bowen and Robert Kamen and Jeffrey Bowen. Jeffrey Bowen's credited twice because of the complicated history of the script.
Yeah. Yeah.
And skipping ahead just a little bit, 4 has new writers on it
Right.
as well because they just keep having new ideas for what the series needs to be, and they reject. Like Bowen got kicked off of 4. He had a script that allegedly everybody liked that was darker. I don't know why that's a continued trend, but like Shane Black, Lethal Weapon 2 is darker once upon a time, and it was better. And Jeffrey Bowen says Lethal Weapon 4 was darker and better. But it kind of makes me think, would Lethal Weapon 5 be darker? Because they keep not going that direction. It's kind of fascinating. And on top of that, Leo Getz wasn't in the third script initially, and they wrote him into it.
Right. Yeah.
And I feel like that's a good first criticism from me. I love Joe Pesci. I think he's very good in the second Lethal Weapon movie. But why is he back?
Right.
He didn't need to be back. And I'm not saying that I hate that he's back, but why is he back?
Right.
What do you think about Leo Getz in Lethal Weapon 3?
Well, it's it's one of those things like let me take it back to Die. We're going to make comparisons of between Die Hard and Lethal Weapon. In Die Hard, you had the great supporting character that is, Reginald Val Johnson playing Sergeant Al Powell,
Yeah.
who, is communicating with McClane the whole night. And he really has a huge heroic moment at the end of the movie. It's kind of a big arc for his character. And in the sequel, which I'm not going to get into the quality of it, but he's kind of relegated to just a bit cameo, and it works because why would he be traveling all the way to Washington D.C. To follow McClane on another adventure? Like, it would have made no sense for him to be in it. So like I would have been okay with Leo Getz having that kind of role. Like,
Sure.
oh, here he is. Just bump into him. But like in Lethal Weapon 3, you know, he's a in real estate now, and he's showing off Murtaugh's house, and it's like, okay, he used to be a tax guy and clean, an accountant, and used to clean, used to do laundering, and now he's a real estate agent. And then Lethal Weapon 4, he's a private detective. Like, they just keep giving him these weird. I mean, not weird, but they kind of keep giving. It's weird that they're connected. Like, they keep giving him these jobs, and that he's terrible at. Um, and it just kind of feels a clumsy way of bringing him into the fold. And like, I understand, like in Lethal Weapon 2, they did form a bond towards the end of the film, but I would never say that Leo Getz is you know an equal to the friendship of Riggs and Murtaugh.
Yeah.
I didn't, you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, okay, they're all three going to be best friends now.
He's
Uh,
now part of the family.
and like, yeah, but that's what we're presented with in 3, and in a way, I get it, because like there were a bunch of scenes in 2 that were really funny with him, and the drive-through scene, and just so many other parts that he had.
The travel to South Africa scene, him and Murtaugh.
Oh yeah, 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 and the chemistry in that, you're going to want to recreate some of that, and so the comic relief, which is weird in a way, because Murtaugh and Riggs are funny
Right.
characters, even when they're not intentionally funny, but there's a lot of humor that comes from them. So then you have this comic relief character in Leo Getz that it just kind of feels tacked on. And it makes sense that they did tack him on to, I suppose, lighten the mood, I guess, is what they were going for. But I don't know. A lot of this movie feels disjointed, and I think, like, unlike the previous two, that they were going for a natural feel and it was successful. I don't think they were able to find a natural flow for this one, because like everything kind of feels like they're trying to capture something, like, having Getz be comic relief, but it doesn't feel natural. It feels interjected. It feels like it was pushed on.
And it
And it's
was.
not terrible. Yeah. And it's not terrible. I like him. I enjoy him. I don't even really hate him in this movie, but I also don't think it's nearly as fun to watch as it was in Lethal Weapon 2. So, that's kind of my stance on that, and I really feel that about so many different things about this movie in particular.
Right.
Why, like, why do we have like a Bond intro, where we have, which the song's not bad. It's Eric Clapton and Sting, um, and it's like a variation of Riggs's theme, from all of the movies, and it's cool. But why? Why? Like, why are we getting this in the third movie? And it doesn't happen again. Like, this is the only time in the series that it has like this cool, and I use quotations here, like this cool opening title sequence that with fire and all this, like a Bond film.
It's really less than a Bond film because it really is just the fire. Like they wanted to make a big deal about that fire.
Right. Yeah, there's no naked women dancing in the background in the flames, which would definitely be uh, the Bond title sequence, and thus makes this inferior. But no, I a lot of this movie just doesn't feel natural, and I think that's what makes a lot of it not stick. A lot of it just falls flat, and from the song to the villain, which Stuart Wilson's a good actor, but he does not seem like one in this movie. He's playing Jack Travis, an ex cop, and like I don't know if it's like an ADR thing or some dubbing or just the way that they shot certain scenes, but his like dialogue is just so stupidly fast. Like he says things really quick that he's almost shouting them, and it doesn't really make any sense why he's doing it. And especially towards the end, in the finale, which again, it goes back to that natural feeling because there's some things about it that are very cool and very like as an action sequence. There's some cool aspects to this, and there's some things I really enjoy. But like then the delivery of it and some of the major points, I it just kind of really misses the mark. And like Jack Travis is definitely one of the key points of that. And like the villains have never really been what the key points of this series, but they've been to this point pretty cool. uh Mr. Joshua and General McAllister in the first one, uh two great actors, did a great job, but they weren't the focus of Lethal Weapon. And Lethal Weapon 2, with the South Africans, they were awesome too. But again, like it was more about the characters. And I read on Wikipedia that that Donner wanted to make it less about the villains or the story. And that's kind of I don't understand that because to me, it really wasn't about the villains or the villains' plot. It was about them getting in it. It was about their relationship. So there kind of lies the problem with that. And I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place here, but I mean that really is kind of my problem with this movie is that there's just so much that could have been so much better, but there's just not a lot of consistency holding it. And like when you kind of just throw something at the wall, and like the themes of this movie too are kind of all over the place, the tone. And that was not we talked about the other two films were really kind of a tonal balance. It was perfect. And this one we're kind of bouncing up and down the walls. It's not the first time that the series has kind of gone with hot button social issues, and in this one it's kind of street violence in LA and then police shootings. And it gets I think it's interesting. I think that some of the things they touch on in this movie are you know they some in some ways it's handled well, in other ways it's absolutely not. And like the scene where Murtaugh, and this is you kind of talked about how this cast, Donner probably wants to make another movie because they had such a great time and they were a family. There are scenes, the chemistry that these actors have together and the crew, you can tell it's still there, even when the film itself isn't firing on all cylinders. But like the scene where Murtaugh, after he's killed Nick's friend, he actually, after he's kind of gotten out of his funk over it and everything, and he has that scene with Nick in the bathroom where he's shaving, and even though it's a little heavy-handed going against the grain, I used to think that was a really dumb line, but I that scene plays a little bit more to me now. I think it works, and then immediately we're like bombed with Boys to Men at the funeral. uh, and I think that is, it just kind of seems tacky and very, dates it.
Speaking of tacky, how about the guy with little machine guns in his hair?
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's just all over the place. It's all over the place, and I'll go ahead and throw my score out. I've kind of struggled with this one, um, but I think I got to give this one a. I'm gonna do it. This might be the first C I've given. I'm giving it a C plus. I wanted to give it a B minus, but there's a lot wrong with this one, and it just kind of falls into mediocrity for me because you can have all these, you've got the cast, you've got the crew, you got the talent, but when you don't present something that's actually consistent and don't have something to make all those things come together perfectly like you have previously, it it kind of falls apart. And again, like, this wasn't hard to watch and it's not bad, but it's not necessarily good either, and it's definitely not up to standard of what these films can be. So it kind of breaks my heart to give one of these movies a C, even though a C plus is not, by any means like a terrible rating. But it just this is a frustrating movie. It always has been for me. So it's always been a frustrating entry in this series.
Well, here's something that is interesting. If I had heard you say C plus before I just rewatched it, I would have agreed with you completely. And I'm not even far away from you. I'm going to give it a B minus. I, for whatever reason, on this recent rewatch, I found myself enjoying it too much, and I found just enough that carried me through and kept me entertained. You know what I mean? I am so close to pushing where you are.
Right.
I could easily go to C plus. It's not just to breathe the wrong way, and I could go to a C plus. But I'm going to give it a B minus up just because I found it entertaining enough to keep it in that pretty good territory. You know what I mean? Like I understand everything that you're saying. Like we're
Yeah.
very close to the same territory. The weird thing is just like watching it this time through, it really is the chemistry of the cast that managed to help keep me entertained for the most part. And there's little moments that feel just genuine enough to kind of work. You know, I enjoy a lot of moments with Renee Russo. I think she's a good addition to the cast here.
Yeah.
I think it works seeing her being a fighter in her own right. I really love the Three Stooges on her computer.
Yeah.
A game. It's like if you know anything about Mel Gibson and you see that Three Stooges is on her computer, it's like, oh, they might actually be compatible, you know, and not be enemies. Just to see that alone, um,
Right.
I think she acquits herself really well and fits well into the cast. It's interesting that they don't bring up his wife in this movie, but it doesn't necessarily bring it down that they don't. At the same time, I would say that that's an example of something that would have pushed this movie even further if they actually dealt with the characters more.
Yeah.
If they had allowed a more genuine relationship to take form. And like I said, I think the relationship works. It's just that if you wanted to go into great territory, it starts with being about the characters. You got to focus on their depth and actually deal with that sort of thing. I think it generally works that Murtaugh's family isn't in jeopardy as much this movie. you know,
Right.
um, you have the connection with Murtaugh's son, but it's not ever them in jeopardy.
Right.
And they're not the ones that are strictly in captured by the villains or the villains in their house or anything else. Which definitely happens in the fourth movie. Like
Yeah.
they're directly attacked. Um,
Right.
it comes home. That doesn't have to be a problem that it doesn't happen in three, but it's an example of where three feels a little bit more distant. The other movies felt more personal,
Yeah.
and this one kind of feels like it's more inconsequential, and that's a huge part of the problem. On top of the structure of the thing not quite working,
Yeah.
it really doesn't flow as well. Like the first two movies, they really work by, oh man, they just randomly encounter the villains. Like it just kind of naturally flows. The villain's plot is already underway, and they just happen to find themselves in the midst of it, and they get involved, and then it quickly gets personal, and it all works and it flows very well.
Yeah.
And the third one attempts to be free flowing, but it just feels messy instead.
Right.
I will say that I read a weird bit of trivia that there's always a villain that has glasses,
Huh.
and I don't know why that's a trivia note. There's always like in the Elite the Weapon series, always like a thug
Yeah.
that has glasses, and in this movie, it's a John Landis looking
Oh
dude.
yeah.
It just threw me the entire time. Anytime he popped up on screen,
Yeah, and he gets one of the best deaths too, because
yeah,
I think it's him that when he dies, but does he get hit with the hammer? And, or he just gets shot. I can't remember, but Murtaugh just yells, "You son of a bitch!" like after he kills him. It's so weird. It's like that kill really frustrated him for some reason, and I've never understood it. I don't know why he yells that after he kills him, but it's really funny to me. But I'm pretty sure it's that henchman.
right. Speaking of frustrations that I think work is whenever Riggs decides to take down that construction site after he kills Jack Travis, and he just
Oh
goes ahead
yeah,
and
yeah,
runs the vehicle into the construction,
yeah,
and Murtaugh looks up, and it's like I forget what exactly he says, but he's like "son of a bitch," like he just like Riggs.
yeah,
Because they're actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this movie has a lot of bitch lines in it.
yeah,
Son of a bitch, you bitch, and like, man, they say bitch a lot in this movie. I don't know whose writing that was. It might have been Carrie Fisher, for all I know, like, because she did some script doctoring on this movie.
that would be hilarious.
But somebody sure wrote a lot of bitches into this thing. I definitely think this movie is very flawed, and it's frustrating when you look at it compared to the A pluses that precede it,
Yeah,
for sure. Um, but I do have it just that notch above where you do, and it's a subtle thing, really. At the end of the day, um, like I said, not too far away. I do want to randomly plug Mark Pellegrino in this movie. Like I didn't previously. I don't remember exactly when the last time I saw this movie was. It's been years ago. I'm trying to remember if we watched it together when we were roommates. We might have. Did we get to this point?
I'm pretty sure we did, but I can't remember.
Yeah. So it might be that long ago, but that's still years ago. Uh, Regardless of which, like I don't remember. It surprised me when I saw Mark Pellegrino pop up very briefly, and
Yeah,
then getting shot in the interrogation room, which is another one of those things. Jack Travis gets into there way too easily.
right.
Speaking of things being believable and flowing naturally, he gets into that interrogation room way too easily.
Yeah,
I get that he's a former cop, ex cop killer, but yeah, like I don't really buy that exactly. They do reference cop killers a little bit too often in this.
yeah,
I yeah, I think that's another thing. They try to force these motifs, like the cop killer bullets.
right.
They try to force that and make that into a line at the end, and then they force the idea of fire at the beginning, which is not a big enough thing to be something you reference. Like fire is pretty common in finales of movies
Right.
or throughout any action scene. It's pretty common for there to be a lot of fire. I don't know why they thought it was a big deal
Yep.
that the finale ended in fire. We're going to tease it at the beginning, and then it'll blow everybody's mind when there's fire at the end.
Right.
Uh, oh, and plus, like, we got to mention just the whole idea of the bomb that Riggs just randomly cuts a wire.
Oh yeah.
What is that? Like, I understand that he takes risk, but what type of risk is that to take? I never known him to be that kind of risky.
Right.
With Murtaugh right there as well. You know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah.
it's a little too silly because the suggestion is that they know they're going to survive, and it makes them a little bit too much into cartoon characters for a moment
Yeah.
for just for a joke like that. And it's only so that they have to be forced down a peg
Right.
in terms of their responsibilities. Uh, Definitely a lot of things that are forced in this movie, but I'm still going to set it a B minus because I find it entertaining to watch.
The armored car driver, uh, and her infatuation with Murtaugh.
Yeah, that's definitely pushed pretty far.
Yeah. Or the like the young cop that they keep running into, that they
Oh
keep
yeah,
like reinforcing the fact, oh, he's young, he's a young cop. And then like the big shootout police station, which I almost wanted to give that aspect of the story a little bit of credit because it almost they at least attempted to find some way to give some stakes to this, because like you involve the office and you involve like Captain Murphy, like, who we really haven't talked about too much in these movies. He's pretty solid as that kind of character, and
yeah,
I like him. I like his performance in these movies.
and he's a Richard Donner regular.
Yeah, and aren't they're related somehow? Like he's his cousin or something. Uh, I think that's
Yeah, that's right. I was actually just looking verifying
yeah,
that myself. He's a cousin of
yeah.
Donner.
And he's I kind of like his, you know kind of his straight man uh take, where he's pretty, he has a dry sense of humor, but he's pretty no nonsense. And likes Riggs and Murtaugh, but when something happens, you got to take them down a notch or whatever, put them on the street. But like they tried to make it personal for him, I guess, and have him and Jack Travis kind of, I guess, be rivals or whatever you want to call it, and then have that big shootout at the end. But it's kind of a mess too, and part of the reason is like you got that kid, cop, like that just ends up dying, and it becomes a big moment, or well, wants to be a big moment, or whatever. And it's just those things that get pushed, and it's like those lines that Jack Travis says, like, "Died in the line of duty, Riggs. There's a funeral from the department, Riggs." It's like he has all these terrible lines that he just screams. And it's like, did Stuart Wilson just hate it so much, like that he just uh, hate the dialogue so much that he just had to scream it because he was so angry he was in this movie? I don't know. It kind of feels that way because when you see him as a villain in Mask of Zorro, he's like a complete class act. He's so good in that movie. It's like it's almost like, is that even the same person? Uh, but he's like, that character is bad, and I can't even remember what he says to Mark Pellegrino's character when he shoots him, but it's just something like "Hi Billy, bye Billy," so it's something silly like that.
Yeah.
And it
See you later, Billy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he says it 3 different times. Something along those
It's
lines.
just so bizarre, and like, I don't know if that was something. Oh, they're like, this villain's going to be real, have some real catchphrases, and he's just screaming out this absurd crap the entirety of the movie, and it's just,
Just all cop references.
yeah, and,
Just in case you forgot that he was an ex-cop.
yeah, and then you got Murtaugh throwing Riggs, the cop killer's like, "Riggs, cop killers!" Like, we get it. We get it. And then, of course, ex cop killers, as you've already mentioned. It's just, there's so many bad one liners in this.
Yeah, the young cop, that was one of those things that just really got me. Like, come on. Like, they make that so obvious that that kid's gonna die, and then he
Yeah.
dies almost immediately, and then they run away. Like it's so pathetically handled. He might as well have been wearing a red shirt,
Yeah.
but like when he just begs to join the journey,
Yeah.
can I come along? Can I come along, please? Like it's really weird. Like, yeah, sure, kid.
I want to see some action. Oh, yeah. You get your whole life ahead of you. Yeah. It's so.
And then Murtaugh says something like another baby.
Oh, you sure you don't want to give it a C plus? No.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like I said, like you focus on the negative aspects of it, and they're definitely present. I make no question. Like there are some uglier aspects of this movie, some sloppy things, some outright bad things. I, yeah, I settle on a B minus because like it, it moves fast, and I still think there's enough that works,
Right.
and that the chemistry from the main cast, the positive things. There's actually some good action. Like I enjoy the car chase that you mentioned, as obnoxious as that lady driver is hitting on Murtaugh. There's still some good energy at play in the action sequence around. Like it's fun,
Yeah.
and I think the pace helps it an awful lot in a great many ways. I think we can't go beyond this movie without referencing the cinematographer too, Jan de Bont, who shot this movie.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
he had, and just to be clear, he didn't shoot the first two. It's Goldblatt that
No.
shot the first two, and now we got Jan de Bont coming in for the third movie in a franchise. and that guy has a great eye. And I do think Lethal Weapon 3 looks very good. It has some good energy to the cinematography as well. Um,
Especially the hockey scene. I kind of like the way it's shot.
sure.
Um,
Yeah.
and the energy to it.
That's what I mean. There's a lot of good energy here. Yeah, you still have to be frustrated, though. I get it. I definitely get the frustration part of it too, and I was honestly surprised that I enjoyed it as much as I did this time. And it's not like the frustration wasn't there.
Right.
I just, as I was watching it, I was pulled along,
Yeah.
and I laughed, and I was entertained, and I maybe I've just let it grow on me just enough. I don't know. It has just enough warmth to it as well. There's still some little family moments that work,
Yeah.
uh, and keep it pulled along. Uh, yeah, it's like I said, we're not far away from the same opinion, but it is that precipice of pretty good to mediocre,
Right.
like it's right there on that precipice. And like I've said before, a lot of movies exist on like that kind of teeter totter.
Yeah.
There are a lot of movies that like you settle one side or the other. Uh, and one of the most frustrating places for a movie to be is a B minus or a C plus.
Yeah.
That is one of the most frustrating places for a movie to exist, where you try to decide if you want to call it good or not. Is it worth watching or not?
Right.
Uh, and obviously, like you're including it as a C plus, where it's kind of in that territory where you might not watch it if it wasn't part of the series.
Right.
It's really close
Yeah.
to that kind of territory, which is a good enough reason to step into Lethal Weapon 4.
Here it comes! Get going! I don't want to die in my underwear, Riggs! Hey, Riggs, what are you waiting for? Shoot him! Shoot him! Let's get out of here! Hey, Riggs! Hey, you think that bird thing helped?
I just wanted to see if you'd do it. Cute shorts.
Because I'll just, without exactly giving a rating first, I'll go ahead and be explicit enough to say that it's better than 3.
Yeah.
And what I was talking about is skipping 3 rather than stopping at 2,
Right.
because I think 4 actually qualifies for sure as a good movie. There's no question.
No, yeah, I'm with you on that.
Categorically, 4 is a good movie. The only frustrating part, if you want to call it frustrating, is that it's nowhere near as good as the first 2 movies.
Right.
But at the same time, the first 2 movies are 2 of the greatest action movies ever made.
Yeah.
So that's a really difficult standard. One of the first things that 4 gets right is that it feels natural. It flows really well. Um, like one piece to the other, it flows
Yeah.
just on a structural level. There are aspects of it that don't really make sense,
Right.
like
Right.
Leo Getz being a private detective.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense, but his involvement in the story feels less forced. He
Definitely.
he flows into the movie smoothly. Uh, the scene that makes the least sense to me is one of the ones that's most memorable, that I've remembered since it came out in theaters. Which this is the only one I ever saw in the theater. I was 14 years old, and I always remember that cell phone scene. Just, especially because the first movie has the memorable, you know, huge cell phone.
Right, right.
in a briefcase, and in the fourth movie, they're joking about how they're making cell phones too small,
Oh yeah, yeah.
uh, where you could lose them, and that was something I think they put in the advertising material as well for this film. But I guess they thought it was really funny to joke about cell phones uh, in 1998. A little bit more commonplace in
Yeah.
2021. um, but even having said that, like it just in general, I think it feels like a forced comedic scene.
Yeah.
I don't know why we have Leo Getz and Chris Rock talking about cell phones outside of the fact that they're both funny guys
Right.
and they want to force a comedy scene in there.
Yeah.
In general, though, I think this outside of maybe even that one scene, I think the movie flows from one scene to the other really, really well. The plot unfolds in a natural way.
Yeah.
And I once again like the way that they get thrown into the plot almost by accident,
Yeah. Yeah.
where you think that they're just having fun out in the boat, and then next thing you know, there's gunfire and there's a big boat and there's an action scene, and it's like, holy cow, we're in the middle of this now, aren't we? And then Murtaugh's, you know, taking in a huge Asian family into his home,
Right.
uh, because he's, you know, in a natural way wanting to help them out, trying to find some way to, which also makes sense based on things that they've talked about before in this series. Like, there's a lot of little touches like that that make sense, and I don't know for sure where you stand on Butters, but I feel like they handle his introduction pretty well, and
Yeah.
Chris Rock may not be on the Riggs Murtaugh level, but I really like a lot of the interplay that happens, uh, the way he gets thrown into the mix and plays along with them when they're picking on people. Uh, there's a lot of ways that kind of has a rhythm to it, and I appreciate the way this movie has the humor. Sometimes goes too far with it, but a lot of it feels familial
Right.
and has good energy to it at the very least. And plus, I think it's really funny that Murtaugh thinks that Butters is interested in him.
Right.
That's a really funny touch. I do kind of hate that Rene Russo is relegated to being the pregnant woman in the background.
Right.
It would have been nice if they found a way for her to be a bigger part, but at the same time, like, I think the movie still works for the most part. So I'm not sure that I certainly don't think they needed to force her into the plot. They could keep her where she's at, and that can work. But the way everybody's like, we're gonna Murtaugh's gonna be a granddad, and Riggs is gonna be a dad, and it definitely pushes the idea of family to a very further level.
Right.
More than just the friendship between Riggs and Murtaugh. Families taking on a bigger, much bigger meaning uh, as their family really grows, which is another aspect of the movie where, if you think about it being 23 years after 4, if 5 is going to have the kid and the grandkid in there, this cast could be huge.
Right.
And I really hope it isn't, if they get to 5 ever. If it really happens,
Yeah.
it better not be. It better not be that sprawling ensemble.
Yeah.
Um, Not to say they couldn't make it work, but I don't want it to get too messy. And this movie, that I do think it threatens to push the bounds a little bit in terms of feeling crowded. It pushes on those boundaries, it mostly works, but it kind of goes a little bit where you're like, come on, guys, keep your focus. Maybe you need to pull back and rein it in just a little bit. Um, but nonetheless, I do think this is a good, fun movie. And before I pass it on to you, I just specifically referenced that opening sequence, which is another thing that I've always remembered, that armored man. And they're just thinking, man, this feels like it could be a much bigger part of a movie
Right.
instead of just the opening scene. Um, that's pretty intense, having this guy blasting on the city streets, flamethrower and uh, all armored up. Murtaugh balking like a chicken in his underwear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, it's a fun, entertaining way to open a movie. And I did just think of one more thing. The whole chase sequence that's really, really fun, and keeps building on top of itself, where eventually they crash through a building.
Right.
And when I saw it in the theater at 14, for whatever reason, this was a time period where it's not like I didn't want to be associated with my parents or my grandma, but we'd all go to the movies at different times. And this time I went with my sister and my grandma, and me and my sister sat separately, like a few rows away.
Yeah.
Uh, for whatever reason, this all in this time frame, we like to sit closer to the screen and further away from the older people. Not even to disassociate, just to be ourselves and be closer to the screen. Uh, burn our eyeballs, I guess, by getting closer to the screen. The movie's better when it's bigger and you can be down closer. But regardless of which, right in that part where they crash into the building, never forget my grandma saying, "Oh, Lance!" like yelling it out loud in the theater. Uh, and I suddenly was very grateful to be separate from my grandma. Me and my sister just kind of ducked down into our seats just a little bit. We don't know this lady who screamed as they crashed into the building. I always liked watching action movies with my grandma. She liked watching action movies too.
Right.
She got a real thrill out of it, but she also had intense reactions like that
Yeah.
in a theater watching a movie. What say you about Lethal Weapon 4, my friend?
Well, I actually want to jump in on that opening scene because, not only is it an immediate improvement over Lethal Weapon 3 as a whole, but,
Right.
like an improvement over the
Opening scene.
opening scene. But
Yeah.
like then we end the last one with fire, and we start this one with fire in a big way, and he's got the flamethrower and the armor and the machine guns. It's almost like a parody level. Like this almost feels like Last Action Hero type scene, like of just how
Yeah.
action it is. Like it's just in your face action film, and I love it. Uh, and
And it's
again,
like making fun of itself.
right, yeah, it definitely doesn't take itself too seriously, but it also isn't just a complete joke. Um, and
No.
I, and I think it does set up the kind of journey we go on where okay, we've got the threads, like he finds out Lorna's pregnant, and then Murtaugh finds out Rianne's pregnant. Those are two plot threads that we follow for the rest of the film, and but I think it's introduced in a really natural way where they're kind of sitting there dodging bullets behind cars, trying not to get shot, and then Riggs comes up with that idea for him to do the the chicken dance, the funky chicken. in the in his underwear, which is hilarious. And then Murtaugh actually does it, which is even better. And that's just part of the fun of this, is that it's just so self-aware and in a way, and that but it is just pure fun. And the joking, the fact that it ends up being a running gag, the camaraderie between them just thrown right back at us at the beginning. It just makes it such a good opening, and such a good tone setter for this one. And I think
Yeah.
that's where it starts to set itself apart from three. Not that three didn't have fun in it, but this is a more confident and more, very much in its groove attempt to bring back that magic of the first two. And again, this one definitely is not as good as the first two by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not necessarily a fair comparison, because we've, gone on and on about how great the first two are. But this one is a good movie, and I really have a good time with it, and the action in it is really good. And the chase scene that you made reference to, that happens a little bit later in the movie, is pretty great, and has some great stunts in it. And I always remember kind of the mobile home that they get on in
Yeah.
that part. And Riggs is jumping around through that, and the action going on with that part. That part always kind of sticks out to me. In
Great stunt work.
Oh yeah, and that series always had some of the best, but that in particular is just great. Um, but of course, the breakout of this movie, one of the big things about it was Jet Li, and this was his first American production, I believe. And he was a great martial artist. We could go on and on about Jet Li's body of work, because he's been in some bad movies made over here, but he's been in some great movies in China. And he's done some good. Not all of his stuff has been trash here. He's done some good stuff. But definitely a great martial artist. And there's a lot of fun built up with him, with the kind of action that we get in this. But he's also a threat, and I think they definitely do a much better job of setting up the the villains in this movie, as opposed to three, where you have Jack Travis just screaming out lines, and all everything that happened with that. But the build up with that fishing scene at the beginning, and everything that happens with the Hongs, and Murtaugh getting involved, and adopting that family, and the loss that he feels when one of them is killed. And then they're constantly under attack, and it doesn't go quite to the same emotional levels that the first two did, but it does kind of bring this home a little more than um, than anything in three did. And definitely is a welcome uh, addition to this. And the the fact that the triads and Jet Li's character are real threats, and there's a depth to it, and there's an edge to it. It kind of gives this a little bit of bite, and I really like kind of the chaotic nature of some of the action, especially like the finale, where it's kind of set up. You have triads, and then these military figures kind of turning on each other, and people getting killed left and right, and there's all sorts of stuff going on. And then the Riggs and Murtaugh show up, and the cops that are with them, and it kind of all goes to hell real quick. But it never gets too dark, it never gets too crazy. But it's also not your regular kind of cardboard cutout finale. It's got a little bit of grit to it, and I love the fact that Riggs is just not up to par to physically take on Jet Li head to head.
Right.
Um,
Well, they definitely make a point that Riggs might be getting too old for this shit
right?
in the
Yeah,
fourth movie. Like that's actually a big point that they go off on for the fourth movie. So it plays off in the finale really well.
yeah, and it is a good payoff. Um, just, and I know some people might. I know a lot of times with villains, especially like more physical villains, like let's go with Star Wars for a second. When Darth Maul was dispatched the way he was, there was a huge groan from certain fans because of how easily one of the coolest looking action villains was just gotten rid of so quick. Well, Jet Li in this, I don't necessarily think he's gotten rid of quickly, but the way that it happens, the people might be disappointed that it wasn't a head to head fight. Riggs ended up getting the best of. No, he wasn't going to be able to do that, and the way that they handle it and the way that it goes down is more believable and more true to Riggs. Honestly, like when you're outmatched, you gotta find a way around it, and it's a little more resourceful and um, true to Riggs and Murtaugh, and it's very much Lethal Weapon, and I appreciate that a little bit more. Plus, we don't get it's not terrible. Again, I hate to keep throwing salt on the wound that is 3, but it's no ex cop killer. It's not some terrible cliche. I just like the way that everything with this kind of wraps up. But the thing about this one is that, like the first two, that yes, the plot is important and it does play a big role, but the thing that comes more to the forefront are the characters. And you talked about Chris Rock as Butters. I did enjoy him in this. You never know. Like, Chris Rock is very much going to be Chris Rock in whatever he is. Like when you have a personality like Chris Rock's and have that voice and everything else, it's going to be hard to differentiate Chris Rock, the person, from the character he's playing. But I think he does a good job in this, in that he's believable. They do try to cram a little too much comedy in. I think that it
Yeah.
feels a little forced, like the scene with him and Leo, and They have a few scenes like that, but particularly where they're going on and on about cell phones, um, and then he even kind of makes reference to the drive-through. Leo does at the end, like, "Oh, you remember this great gag from Lethal Weapon 2?" Um, it just kind of felt a little forced, but again, come on, that's way better than that the running gag that was the delivery truck driver or whoever she was trying to hook up with Murtaugh in 3. And I'm sorry if there's any Lethal Weapon 3 fans out there. I know I keep kind of giving it a lot of crap, but
And I gave it a slightly better rating,
no.
and I like to give it crap.
But no, this feels, aside from those things, this one feels more natural. And the characters, we actually, yes, it is kind of just catching up with them, and it does feel like you're hanging out with some old friends, but you're actually at a point in their lives where something's happening. And, you can always have, oh, let's just have the characters back again. And that might be fine to some people, but, you also want to have something going on. And of course, Riggs, is at a point in his life where he, like you said, he's he's getting too old for this shit, and not just the action, but life in general. Things are getting a little intense, a little difficult, and he's at a kind of a conflict about his relationship with Lorna, Renee Russo, back again, and I they're at a point where she's pregnant. He still hasn't let go completely of uh, his deceased wife, going way back before the first movie. So he still has things going on. Of course, Rianne Murtaugh's daughter is pregnant, and uh, Roger doesn't know that Butters is the father. We go through. There's a running gag with that too, of him thinking that Butters is gay, and it's actually pretty funny. And but it's actually, we see development in these characters that we already know, but we see them going through these moments, and at the end, it all kind of comes together in a emotional finale. And after the action, like the action ends kind of early, compared to the other Lethal Weapon movies. This one kind of has an epilogue, and I really do enjoy it in that way. It is kind of, maybe we all got a sense that it was going to be the last one, and again, it remains to be seen at this point if it was um, the last of the series, but it does kind of feel like a good way to end things the way that it does. I will always appreciate it for that. That it does leave things kind of a nice, not everything's like needs to be tightly wrapped up, but it's just kind of this nice moment where they all get a picture together. And again, that might be corny and cliche, but it is kind of this family of
Even the
characters,
chief.
and some of them are, yeah, and it just, that's what it is, and it feels like a nice family reunion in a way. And ultimately, I think that this one does fall short of the first two, and but again, we talk about how great those two are. This doesn't have the the heights that those movies have, and it doesn't have the emotional highs that it does. But it's still cut from the same cloth, and I think that definitely makes it worth a watch. And I give it a B plus. Like this is a good fun movie and a worthy entry in the series. And it definitely, when you're watching them in order, it is a great breath of fresh air after Lethal Weapon 3. And and I think and it feels like a good way to end it. It's nice when you're doing a series marathon and the last entry is actually fun and a good way to end things. Like, not every series has that luxury, so that's the good thing about this.
Yeah, we talked before about what Lethal Weapon 5 might be or not be, and the tone that it might strike if we ever get it. But obviously, even if we get Lethal Weapon 5, boy, will it feel different compared to um, what this feels like, because 4 happens so close, technically, relatively, to the rest of the series.
Right.
Lethal Weapon 5 would be quite a distant, different thing. Um, but I agree with a B plus. Obviously, not to beat a dead horse, but different than the A pluses that were 1 and 2. But that's the high bar,
Right.
that those movies set. I'm pleased to have this movie. It's a good ride of a movie, fun time that works with the characters better than the third one did, in terms of actually feeling like it's tied into them somehow a little bit more, in
Right.
their journey. In I will say that among the things that, like, Lethal Weapon 4 does, that or has behind the scenes, that maybe is a sign of it not congealing as much as it could have, is like going back to that script. And you have new writers all throughout this one. And obviously the Jeffrey Bowen script that never came to light. Uh, but Jonathan Limpkin credited on the story, who is a writer on Devil's Advocate, Red Planet. Um, so interesting credits from him. Alfred Gow and Miles Miller, who were the creators of Smallville, wrote on the story, but this final script apparently from Channing Gibson, who wrote on Saint Elsewhere and NYPD Blue, and eventually Cradle to the Grave. So I guess he liked the Jet Li connection, or somehow that brought him into Cradle to the Grave. Uh, a little bit of mess, a little bit of mess behind the scenes in terms of finding the right story that everybody was happy with. Um, the fact that it ultimately became a good movie, that's credit to everybody involved for sure. You know, because it definitely brings things on an uptick from 3, helps bring it back home a little bit. It deserves credit for that. I always like that final action scene, because as much as Riggs is supposed to be a lethal weapon and be kind of dangerous and reckless and have his martial arts skills, Jet Li is Jet Li. I do think this is just another kind of side point about Jet Li, who I love in this movie. I think this might be his best American movie. Uh,
Yeah.
when I kind of go through his filmography, it's like he has other movies that I like more, but this might be my favorite of his American roles, which is an interesting
Right.
side effect, you know.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree with that either because again, like he's been in so many movies. He hasn't really had too much of a. I'm not going to criticize him for this, but he doesn't really say no. It
No,
just doesn't seem like a lot. He's been in such a wide range of stuff since he's been over here. Um, but and he also made some, you know, some stuff in China too. While he came back over here, so um, a lot of stuff going on. But I do agree. Like as far as his American body of work, I think this is probably the best, and I think it plays to his strengths too because um, I've seen a lot of movies of him in America try to give him a lot of dialogue, and like not that he can't do it, uh, especially like in his own native tongue, you know. Um, but I think this one he's more of a quiet danger, and it definitely plays to those strengths. And he does, and when he does speak, you pay attention. Um, I think that works in his favor too. But the action speaks for itself as well. He's just so so focused, and you can see it in his eyes. And that's the great thing about him, and he's got a great presence, and they take full advantage of it in this movie.
and they apparently thought about um, doing that Jackie Chan as that character, and
Yeesh.
I can't imagine that. I
No, I
really
can't
have a
either.
hard time imagining. I think he turned it down because he didn't want to be villain at that
Right.
time. Or I don't know, but like, yeah, I just can't imagine that working as well. Jet Li is a far better choice for this. I mean, to be honest, like if they did Jackie Chan, not saying they would have done this, but like they could have had more comedy scenes. They could have
Yeah.
done even more comedy. And I'm not saying Jackie Chan can't do more serious stuff because he can. But uh, if you wanted somebody to bounce off of the Three Stooges of Mel Gibson, you could easily bring Jackie Chan into that
Right.
scenario. That could have been quite ridiculous. Jet Li's a great threat in this movie. I think it works off really well. But yeah, this is a good series. We'll see if it does or does not continue with the fifth movie, and it has continued already with the TV series we haven't seen. Um,
Right.
but technically, I guess, quite literally in terms of intellectual property.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
um, but yeah, I think it's a good run of a series. Really, you could just watch one and two and be okay, but I'll take four
Oh, for
especially.
sure. Yeah.
And I truthfully just enjoy spending time with these characters. It does feel like coming back to family in a way, you know.
Yeah.
I'll enjoy revisiting all these movies in the future again. Certainly. Drew's pleasure talking about these movies with you.
No, same here. Same here, man.
And see you next time on Movie Marathon Mood.